is Diane Alps. She has worked for the Cabrillo Aquarium for the past 20 years. Currently, she is the aquarium's boat programs manager. In this job, she leads the aquarium's annual Baja expedition, the Whale Watch Naturalist program, and all other boat-based activities. Diane has been a naturalist on many expeditions. She also has several certifications and served on many cetacean-based committees. And she has a research interest in a marine parasitic copepod. For those of you who know her, I think you know we're up for quite a presentation on summer whales.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see some friendly names and faces, and I'm looking forward to the presentation. And as Denise mentioned, I really like to talk about what you guys want to know. So I know there's a little, you can raise your hand in Zoom, and I'm happy to interact and talk. We don't have to just stay on course with the talk. I'm happy to, answer your questions, and I'm here for you, really. So anything I can answer is my pleasure and what I'm really excited about. But for now, we'll talk a little bit about those whales that we're seeing out there, and whales that you guys can see from the Palos Verdes Peninsula. As you guys know, you have one of the best vantage places in the world to see whales, where you can see them from land and don't need to go to sea for those people who don't have their sea legs. Personally, I feel most at home at sea, and I'm really happy to have been able to go out on the Navigante at Redondo Beach last weekend. We had a really nice pod of dolphins, and I got sun-kissed and got to soak up some of my vitamin D and that beautiful ocean air. So hopefully you guys will get on a boat if you feel so inclined. There's lots of boats out there that are happy to take you and happy to have us support our local businesses. So let me see, how can I do this? I was gonna say a show of hands, but we have not so many faces showing right now. We've got more names than faces, so it might not be as interactive as I was hoping. I was kind of wondering how many people maybe participate in the gray whale census, or just pop out there and, hi, Susan, pop out there and see whales, obviously, when you're doing stuff. But anybody volunteer with the whale census? No census volunteers, but you guys do the whale cart? Does everybody do the whale cart? Hi, Joyce, you do census for sure. I know Henry's there. He's been one of our whale watch naturalists for a very, very long time. I don't see any other familiar faces and names, but so we do have some whale experienced people here. But many of you probably remember the days, as I say here, my title, remember the days when it was only grays, for the longest time, for literally decades. And all the records show that really, for the most part, Southern California has been a great whale watching location during the winter and spring for gray whales. And only until recently did we start to see other species. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I've had quite a bit of fun in the last it's a little over 20 years now. When I came to the Los Angeles area, I was actually raised, we didn't check our advancing, there we go. I was actually raised out in Indio, out in the Palm Springs area. I was a desert rat until my gills opened up and dragged me to the ocean. And I started volunteering for the Cabrillo Aquarium in '98 as a whale watch naturalist, and started working for them not too long after that. And and as Adam mentioned, I now work for the aquarium. I run the whale watch program. I lead the Baja trips, and I also started my own project, California Whales and Wildlife, where I started a campaign called Whale Safe that I'll talk about in a few minutes. I am also currently the Channel Islands Cetacean Research Unit's large whale stranding coordinator, which means that for whales that wash up, unfortunately dead, the stranded whales in San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura County, I'm the lead responder for those dead large whales. I go out and coordinate all the volunteers that come out and help us do a necropsy, which is an animal autopsy. We go out and we try to collect specimens and try to do the forensics to figure out what happened and what killed that whale. And then I also just recently became a research associate with Cascadia Research Collective, a very, very well-established research organization that's been studying large whales off of the our eastern North Pacific for since 1979. So I'm really happy to be a part of that organization. But as I was putting this together, I noticed I don't know what my fascination is with seas, but clearly, you know, if you've got an organization that starts with C, I think I'll be signing up, because that seems to be something in common here. So speaking of seas, and it's probably what it's all about, is cetaceans. So I wanted to just give you guys a quick, you know, a quick reminder, refresher, some of the things that you've probably learned about many times in the past about cetaceans, our wonderful world of whales, dolphins, and porpoises. The official number right now are that there are 90 species of whales, dolphins, and porpoises in the world. And that's split between two different types of animals, the mysticetes, or the baleen whales, those filter feeding animals, and then the odontocetes, all the toothed whales. And technically speaking, right, they're all whales of some sort, even dolphins, that's just a common name, but they are all toothed whales or baleen whales. We could get into some real details and just spend almost the entire time just on this one slide alone, really, but we have so many fun things to talk about. But mysticetes in general, our filter feeders, are generally larger in size, definitely a larger biomass. So those animals like blue whales, the largest animal in the world ever that we know of. They don't chew their food, they don't mash up their food in any way, they engulf their prey, typically smaller fish or plankton. And they do have two blowholes, just like we do, located up at the top of the head. They don't echolocate, they don't create their own biosonar, and most of them are migratory. And we'll talk a little bit about animals that aren't. They're not all migratory, but when we think of these large whales, typically they're moving from higher latitudes where there's a more abundance of prey to lower latitudes where there's warmer conditions for them to breed. Odontocetes, on the other hand, our toothed whales, there's a large range in size in toothed whales, from the largest, which is a sperm whale, one of the largest, it is the largest of the toothed whales, down to the smallest cetacean in the world, and unfortunately one of the most critically endangered, the vaquita, which is only about 4 feet in length. These animals all have teeth, and many of them are what we call monodonts, meaning it's the same tooth all the way around. They're using their teeth just to grab their food and suck it down. They don't mash their food with their teeth. The only time there's any use of teeth for anything besides grabbing is typically in the larger, the species that hunt larger prey, such as killer whales. Killer whales and false killer whales, they'll use their teeth to grab it, and then using typically shaking their head or using their partner in their pod, they'll tear apart their prey so that they can tear it down into smaller pieces. These all animals have a single blowhole, which we'll talk about in more detail in a moment, and they echolocate, so they create their own sound as a biosonar to help them navigate a little bit. And we have to mute Anne. She's doing business here, I think. We have a few people unmuted right now. Maybe we can hit mute on that if you don't mind. All of our odontocetes have a very, very complex social structure, and a lot of that involves communication. And by that, I mean that they stay with their family units for the majority of their life or for a very long time. Killer whales, for example, they've got a matriarchal society, so the adult female is kind of in charge of that family unit. That's not always the case, but there are Very, like I said, complex social structures. Again, that in itself could be an entire conversation for us. These animals, the odontocetes, tend to disperse or follow their prey more than migrate. So it's really all about prey. They're eating throughout the year, not amassing bulk in one season and then fasting like most of the mysticetes do. Are we good? Any questions as we move forward in that? Are we rolling ahead? All right. So here we are looking down into the two blowholes of a gray whale. So we know just by looking here that that animal has teeth or baleen. So we know it has baleen in its mouth, right? So this is a filter feeding animal just by those two blowholes. And this is a nice illustration that shows you how baleen is structured and coming down from the roof of the mouth only. The working part here, can you see my cursor when I move it? Oh, good, that helps. So you can see that on the inside is actually the working part of the baleen, and the outside is where the water flows through. This is the part that is on the outside. It's really funny because I'm still using my hands as well and pointing at the screen as though you could see that. So I do have some Zoom adaptations myself that I need. While there are several ways that they utilize this baleen, primarily the species that are mysticetes will engulf their prey, which we will also talk about in more detail, but they engulf their prey. And when they do that, their lower jaw, the pleats expand on the lower jaw, and the tongue will actually fall back into the throat, kind of like a piston. It'll fall back in the throat, and that creates just a large cavernous area, allowing for more space for water and their prey to fill up. And then they close their mouth, use the strong muscles to shut or squeeze together the lower jaw. And then they use that tongue to help push, thrust the water out as it comes back into the mouth. We talked about the single blowhole of the odontocetes. Here you're looking straight down on a bottlenose dolphin, and you can see that the reason they only have a single blowhole instead of like us and our two blowholes, they've adapted one of those. So one is pinched shut, and down inside, adjacent to the skull here, you can see there are specialized air sacs, and those air sacs, if you think about like a balloon, those air sacs create noise. And if you think about a balloon, and if you squeeze the opening a little bit and let little bits of air out, it makes chirps and whistles and sputtering sounds. And that's exactly how dolphins will, and all odontocetes will, create their own biosonar. So those little air sacs here have muscles that let little bits of air out, and they project that sound to help find prey and navigate. So that is echolocation. So only one blowhole is used to exchange air, and the other one is used for their echolocation. So if anybody is feeling really extra nerdy and wants to get deep down into some marine mammal and some cetacean science, or even just get some information on like fact sheets and other species, I highly recommend the Society for Marine Mammalogy. That is our professional society, and they have really done a lot in recent years to develop very user-friendly, rich content. And so they have the conservation and science section of their website has extensive information on taxonomy and how these decisions are made. You know, there's a lot of science on looking at morphology, but also genetics right now. And that's why I said currently there's 90 species, because it's an ever-growing science. As we learn more, sometimes we lump those animals back together and make maybe what was thought to be two species one, and sometimes the genetics show that they're actually not as related as we thought, and they separate them. They also have a host of species fact sheets, and they're really interesting. What the Society for Marine Mammalogy has done is has worked with and embraced that which is Wikipedia. And you know, the Wikipedia has been known to have an immense amount of information, but not always completely reliable. Well, everything that is related to marine mammals on Wikipedia has been vetted by the Society for Marine Mammalogy. They are constantly going in, monitoring those pages and updating them. So you can get to species fact sheets that have been created by the Society for Marine Mammalogy on their website, but they also link to the Wikipedia page. And so you have an enormous amount of information there. And as you can see here, they also have an immense amount of references for books and stuff. So again, just the end all be all of marine mammal science is the Society for Marine Mammalogy. For the naturalist side, which is a little bit more what you guys are doing, what I'm doing out on boats, what you guys are doing, interacting with people, this whale watching handbook that has been recently created by the International Whaling Commission is really useful and interesting. They do have a lot of species information. They talk a lot about how to pick a boat, where to get a boat in your area, what is responsible whale watching. And so the International Whaling Commission has done an enormous amount of work as well. So moving on to looking again, here's our 90 species of whales. And you can see on the left-hand side are our baleen whales, the larger species, fewer but larger. And then on the right-hand side of the screen are all of the odontocetes, or the toothed whales. So, as we mentioned, gray whales, Southern California is known for its gray whales, and gray whales have been so important to our area and so important for whale watching and marine ecotourism. And they were really one of the foundations of whale watching in the late 50s and mid 50s, late 50s, early 60s in San Diego. There was a company that started taking people out whale watching. And then in the mid 60s into the late 60s, the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium and our own John Olguin said, hey, we've got a lot of fishing boats sitting at the dock and we've got kids in school and whales going by. Let's mash all that together. And so we were the first ones to start taking kids out whale watching. Whale watching as an ecotourism started here in Southern California, and now it is multinational, international, worldwide, multi-billion dollar industry, and has huge impacts on the economy in every area that you can go see whales. It also helps to raise awareness, right? So people are more familiar about whales today than they were when we started this some 40 to 50 years ago. And I think it proves accessibility. A lot of us know that we can get out on a boat. I mean, I was just out on a boat, Redondo Beach whale watching, Matt Walsh whale watching in Marina Del Rey. You can go out on a boat for 3 hours for $50 and see dolphins. You can, oftentimes see large amounts of whales, including the largest whale in the world. So it really is quite accessible to get out there on the water in many places in the world. But things have changed. Things have changed, and you guys know that from being at Point Vicente and from all your great instructors there, but also probably from your experiences and from what you're seeing. Now we're seeing whales well beyond our gray whale migration and well beyond the few months a year that we have the gray whales migrating past. And it's really exciting. Here's some information that we were able to gather. A lot of our hardworking volunteers from the American Cetacean Society Los Angeles chapter's Gray Whale Census Project. Just sitting out there, not just sitting out there, but while they were sitting out there counting gray whales, they've also captured information such as what other species are being seen. And these graphs just represent the percentage of the days. The gray whale census lasts, as you know, from from December 1st through the end of May. And I believe it's 185 days of watching. And so these numbers are a percentage of the number of days that during the gray whale census that this other species was seen. So in this case, humpback whales were typically seen you know, no more than 5% of the days of the gray whale census. And as you can see here, there has been an upward trend in the last 20 years, and this chart represents the last 15 years, but there's been an upward trend in seeing and how many days of the gray whale census that we will see humpback whales. And you'll see that consistent also with blue whales, a nice upward trend here, as well as fin whales. Now, keep in mind, this is only December to May. This isn't even counting our May to December, the summertime that we're actually talking about and in the midst of. But this does show that that trend of those species coming through our area much more regularly and much more frequently. Of course, along with that, we saw a higher number of boater interactions as well, as that is also recorded. That was one reason I started this campaign called Whale Safe, and I work with boaters, I work with private boaters as well as commercial whale watchers, and we try to promote the safest whale watching possible, best interactions for the viewer as well as for the whale, by you know, staying at a safe distance and following without disturbing them. We worked with Cascadia Research Collective and NOAA Fisheries to develop these guidelines, including how to approach and guidelines on how not to interact with the whale so that you don't scare it or startle it. I do have these cards and materials available if they ever come in handy for any of your projects at PVIC or anything any of your other projects you're involved in. They all include information about harassment and entanglement and the number to reach NOAA. But of course, if any of you are boaters, always just hail the Coast Guard on Channel 16 as your first and best option. So as I mentioned, so we're seeing a higher number of these species, these what were long referred to as our exotic species, humpbacks, blue whales, fin whales, the largest whales in the world being seen here on a regular basis or more frequently. But we're also in one of the busiest oceans in the world, California, Los Angeles coastline. We have some 10 million people that are, you know, within an hour of our coastline and oftentimes using this very, very busy waterway, especially during the summer months when all of a sudden we're seeing all of these species. So here we are, of course, and the area that we're looking at right now is called the Southern California Bight. The Bight is referring to the area between Point Conception, here just north of Santa Barbara. This is the Santa Barbara Channel and our northern Channel Islands. And of course, here's the Santa Monica Bay. And you guys ever placed right in this area in our beautiful Channel Islands. The Southern California Bight goes all the way down to the Mexican border here in San Diego. This area is a very, very rich habitat for many reasons, for many species, not just marine mammals, but when we talk about the world of whales, can anybody remember how many species of whales, dolphins, and porpoises there are in the world? A show of, I see Rosalie, she said 90, I could see it, I can read lips. I'm getting better at that too, that's for sure. Thank you for having your camera on, Rosalie, and telling me there's 90. So thinking about that, 90 species of whales, dolphins, and porpoises in the world, and 28 species have been documented in this very, very small, think of how small the Southern California Bight is compared to the world, right? So here's our little Southern California Bight. And 28 species, a third of all whales, dolphins, and porpoises have been documented here in our waters. It does show that it's a very, very rich habitat. Of course, as you guys teach about with a lot of other marine life, we have the cold currents coming from the north, of course, and the warm currents coming from the south. We have this really rich, what we call bathymetry, the canyons and mountains of the ocean floor, creating upwelling and currents, bringing nutrients up to the surface. This all makes a very, very rich habitat, plentiful with food and abundant. So this is why we have so many species that have been documented here. But of course, a lot of those were come and go and rare and random. And we're seeing more and more of those with more frequency. So here we are, a beautiful graphic done by one of our colleagues at the Cabrillo Aquarium. And you can see the zoomed in here, again, you can see some of the bathymetry. Again, bathymetry is talking about like topography on land. When you can see a map, the map is topography, but on the water it's called bathymetry. So when you can see the hills and valleys and low points, that's called bathymetry. So here you can see right off of the Palos Verdes Peninsula, you guys have that very, very steep drop off, and it's very close to shore, which, as you know, makes it one of the best places to see whales. But you can see that there's many of those steep drop-offs in our waterway. There's a really nice canyon right off of San Pedro. Of course, we have the Redondo Canyon. Even this Santa Monica Canyon, although it looks a little more shallow, is also very rich. Point Dume is another really great habitat. But look at the backside of Catalina as well. You have a very, very steep escarpment along the backside of Catalina. So the reason I show you that is to show you where we're getting animals and what time of year we're getting them. And so in those steep areas, we talked about upwelling. And right when the cold currents from the bottom are forced up to the surface, they bring with them nutrients. When those mix with the sun, just like plants, anything else we want to grow, sun and nutrients equals blooms, right? So we get these really rich plankton blooms, a really high abundance of nutrients in the steepest of the areas. So here's that San Pedro escarpment I pointed out, of course, here right off of Point Vicente, and then Redondo Canyon. Where there is a higher abundance of plankton and krill, you tend to get a high abundance of dolphins. You have the small, them they're eating bait fish that are eating the krill. So you can see here where the higher rate of hash marks is a higher abundance of dolphins. And then of course you get quite a few along that entire area, but that's why we get large amounts of those small cetaceans in that area. They're pursuing the krill, which is being eaten by small bait fish. Gray whales, they're not feeding while they're coming through here, but they are following the topography, not necessarily the bathymetry, but they are using that bathymetry a little bit as well. So we like to say that gray whales go point to point. They go from Point Dume to Point Vicente and down here to Dana Point. It's kind of a direct path for gray whales using the coastline and their migration. A higher number of gray whales are actually migrating behind Catalina Island and taking that offshore route. And then you get a very few that actually will wander, especially during the northbound migration, a few that will actually hug the coast and move in very closely. So here you can see the overlap of all of these animals. So also when you have the high abundance of krill, that same area I pointed out that dolphins will feed, well, that's also where you'll get the large whales. They're here for krill and for small bait fish as well. So these are these areas where you will get large numbers of animals right along those main rich areas. They tend to overlap where gray whales are, but we don't tend to see them the same time of year for the most part. So just to touch on gray whales really quickly, you know, their population, last it was estimated was at about 27,000. We'd seen a really nice recovery with them. Of course, in recent years, currently we're in the middle of an unusual mortality event. We are seeing a large die-off of gray whales, unfortunately. And that probably has to do with the large warm water mass that we have had since 2014, I believe. 2014 to 2018, I think, was the richest time of that big warm water mass they called the blob. That area wasn't just warm water off of our coast, but you know, the entire eastern North Pacific, including the Arctic, and that melted the ice in the Arctic waters and prevented when the ice is prevented from developing there. You don't get as rich of a habitat and you don't get as much prey for gray whales in the summer months. So their prey declined, and therefore their nutrition declined, and a lot of the whales that we're seeing that are dead and dying are emaciated and quite unhealthy and not having enough prey. They have that really nice traditional heart-shaped blow about 10 feet high. It's one way we can tell them so very well from other species as they come along the coastline, and of course moving in very close to the coastline, which is so great for them, or so great for us, I should say. They have these beautiful, I love their flukes, but they have a lot of beautiful coloration as well. Here you're seeing some scars from where their barnacles are present. And of course you can head down to the lagoons in Baja to see them at any time. Denise and Norm have joined me on that trip. And I think I saw Bob as well. Didn't I see Bob on online? And he and his wife joined us too. We've had lots of fun, and Susan too. We've had a lot of fun people from Point Vicente and Los Serenos join us on this trip. And hopefully you guys all will at some point. Or we go down to see the cow-calf pairs, and of course we can see calves as they migrate along the coast up north as well, coming very close into Point Vicente. And it's shameless, of course, but these are some of my favorite pictures and some of my favorite experiences in the world. So here's some wonderful fun down in the lagoons of Baja. Here, actually, I'm leaning over kissing a whale and a calf, and I still get giddy and goosebumps about it, and anybody that's been there probably does too. It's so much fun. These calves just love to interact. They're very, very curious and very, very interactive and engaging and just amazing. This whale just couldn't stop opening its mouth, and we got to pet its tongue and play with its baleen, and it just seemed to love every moment of it, rolling around and rubbing up against the boat. And the our driver here, Ponghetto, kept splashing the water because these whales just were so attracted to the constant splashing and kept opening its mouth and rolling in it. It was just amazing. Look, I still get giddy about it. Anyway, if you ever have a chance, but seeing whales along our coast is just as magical. And, you know, anytime you can see any of them. But if anyone wants to come to Baja with me, let me know. So humpback whales are another really, really fun whale to see. And I'll have to tell you, when I started in this in the late 90s, the best place to see humpback whales and blue whales was to go up to Santa Barbara Channel. And it still is a much higher abundance in the Santa Barbara Channel or areas further north, Monterey, off of San Francisco out to the Gulf of Farallones. But that's quite a drive when you can just see them here. On, you know, on not any given day, but there's a good chance during the spring and summer to see humpback whales. There's estimated about 2,000 off of our coastline and probably 60,000 or so around the world. There's been some really, they have a heart-shaped but taller than a gray whale. So their blow is a bit more of a tall V. Depending on what angle you see it on, but if you're looking straight behind it, their blow is a little bit taller V. Can anybody tell me why we see different shapes in the blows? Give me a chance to take a little drink of water here, or not water. You can unmute yourself if you want. Joyce, why is there different shapes and sizes of blows? So the blowholes on whales can be angled a little bit differently. Some more, you know, remember we were looking straight down at gray whales' blowholes? Well, their blowholes tend to be angled out just a little bit. So depending on the orientation of those blowholes will be the direction of the blow when they exhale. The height of the blow has a lot more to do with the size of the whale. So the larger the whale, the taller the blow. For example, a fin or blue whale that's coming in at about 80 feet long, their blow can be some 25 to 30 feet high, where our little, although they feel quite large too, our little gray whales at 40 feet long will have a blow that's about 10 feet high. And our cute little minke whales don't even have a visible blow at all. And those are the smallest of the baleen whales that we can see here in Southern California. Humpback whales are known to be very dynamic. They often breach. Many of you have met my husband, Bernardo. He has a theory that you can't spend more than 45 minutes with a humpback whale without it doing something fun. I haven't tested that completely yet because, but anecdotally, I would totally agree with him. They got a lot of claim to fame by the Pacific Whale Foundation, using them in a lot of commercials and stuff. Remember the gum commercial, right? I'm getting a piece, or that's not the gum commercial. That's the Pacific Whale Foundation on their insurance. But of course, everybody often thinks that the only way to see humpback whales is going to Hawaii. But like I said, going to the Santa Barbara Channel and then even here, many times much of the year you can catch humpback whales, especially in the spring and early summer. They have very, very long pectoral fins, about a third of their body length and about 15 feet long or so, just their pectoral fin alone. And here you can see that it's covered with barnacles and 2 different species of barnacles, including these long, skinny acorn barnacles, or gooseneck barnacles, sorry. This is looking head on, the humpback whale coming straight at us. A nice picture by Bernardo here. And you can see not only the barnacles, but the tubercles, which are basically little hair follicles believed to be used for, they have some sensory input there with a little hair or follicle in each one, but it also could be helping turbulence and moving water over the animal. Just briefly about humpback whales, they are found basically throughout the world's oceans. We're going to look at a map of their ranges here in a moment, but there are many different populations of humpback whales around the world, 14 in total. They feed, as I mentioned, they're migratory, so they feed up in the higher latitudes where there's a higher abundance of prey, and they go to the lower latitudes where the water is warmer for breeding purposes. Their gestation is about 11 months, and as with many large whales, they give birth every 2 to 3 years. And yeah, but humpback whales get to be, 50 to 55 feet long, so they're quite large. Here's looking at the results, and it looks
Diane, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah, of course, Anne.
On the previous slide, it says the humpback has the longest mammalian migration. Does that compete with the gray whale? Can you talk about those two?
Yes, actually, it's longer, right? So here's what we know about the gray whale. And I'm always careful, no matter what I'm talking about, even with when I say the blue whale is the largest animal to ever live on Earth, I always say, you'll almost always hear me say that we know of yet, because I kind of feel like there's always something, but there may be something buried down there. The gray whale has one of the longest migrations of any mammal in the world. What we know about the gray whale is that it migrates from the Arctic down to Baja. And that's a range of area where 27,000 whales are feeding, and a large number of those whales come down to their breeding grounds. It's a range. What we know about humpback whales is an animal has been documented. This was actually quite fascinating because it was done through a very dedicated and opportunistic citizen scientist opportunity. There was a collection of photos held by a scientist who was looking at photos from from Brazil that had been taken by scientists, and was looking at trip photos on Flickr, just like searched humpback whale on Flickr, and was going through flukes and found a matching tail. We match humpback whales by the underside of their tail, and matched a tail from Madagascar to Brazil. That direct swim just around water is 9,600 kilometers, which is longer than the range from the Arctic to Baja. The likelihood is that that animal went down to the Arctic to forage, so it's probably even longer. But science will only let us look at the known, right? So it was probably a much longer migration, but what we know is that it went from Madagascar to Brazil. So we have a single animal making a longer migration than the mass of gray whale. But generally speaking, so we don't have a document of a gray whale going from a highest point in the Arctic to the lowest point in Baja. We just know that their migration in general is a large one. That's a really great question, Anne. Thank you for clarifying that. Get back over here. So looking again at this map, it does look, it looks like that old string art that we used to do, right? Tying it around nails and moving the string back and forth. This was a really great project. It was a 5-year multinational, multi-agency project where they studied all of the humpback whales in the entire North Pacific. The project was called SPLASH, and you could look up SPLASH humpback research, and they looked at population estimates, and they took blubber samples when they could, you know, skin and blubber samples. They got blow samples when they could. They took photo ID when they could. They put tags on when they could. They tried to get as much information in a 5-year period as possible. And they really learned an amazing amount of, gathered up an amazing amount of information about humpback whales. And you can see here, each color is referring to a different breeding area. And so up in the northern latitudes, the higher latitudes are the feeding grounds. And you can see that many of those breeding areas feed up to or lead up to, I should say, the feeding grounds. But the animals tend to go back to their native breeding grounds. So those are considered distinct population segments. An animal that feeds in Alaska and breeds in Hawaii is not necessarily going to go up to Alaska and then come back to the United States, in other words, or the coastal United States mainland. There doesn't tend to be overlap from these populations, for example, even if they feed in the same area. Is that good? Understood? Is that clear? Does that make sense? So looking at that, here is a little bit more refined look at that, but you can see the various different breeding grounds, Hawaii being a very, very large winter breeding ground, many areas off of Mexico. We actually have 3 here off of the Mexico area that are breeding grounds, all feeding to these higher latitudes. Well, since then, they've looked at this around the world as well, and can see that there are really 13 different distinct breeding grounds, 14, that's what I had said earlier, 14 different distinct breeding grounds. You can see the pink and the blue and the yellow are all distinct breeding grounds, or what we call distinct population segments. They did an analysis of all of these animals, and what they were able to discover, which was a great success, but raised a lot of warning flags for some people. But all those blue areas, those populations are not at risk. They're actually thriving or doing well or recovering really well from earlier whaling. Just the pink and the yellow areas are the populations that are at risk. And so they were able to downlist those under protected status. And of course, a lot of conservationists feared and got worried about lowering or, downlisting or downgrading their protected status. But, conservation work needs some successes as well, right? I mean, I think you all, when you're out there teaching, it's really important to be able to say, we're doing this work for something. A lot of conservationists were worried that if we downlisted them, it might open up the ability for other threats to, having protected status means we can give them extra protections when needed, and removing those protected status might open the door. I think they were, fearful for putting them on whaling or other issues. So fortunately that hasn't happened yet, and I think it's really good to be able to have some feathers in our cap and say that we have had some success. You might notice, though, just really quickly, that 5 and 6 here, these numbers 5 and 6, those are breeding grounds off of Mexico and Central America. And those are the whales that we typically see. And those are still considered endangered and even threatened. So those are still habitats, populations at risk. And so the animals, the humpbacks that we see here off of the California coast are considered still endangered species. So we don't so much see them in their breeding grounds. As I mentioned, that's a little bit further south. I took this picture in Australia. I had a chance to go see humpbacks there. This baby was super newborn. Its flukes was still floppy. It didn't even have structure yet. Its little dorsal fin, which is so tiny on a humpback whale, was still curled over. I just think it's so cute. It had to be added, but we don't see them in their breeding stage here. We're fortunate, though, to see them in their feeding habitats and their feeding grounds. These are 2 humpback whales that have come up to the surface They open their mouth just below the surface. They're lunge feeding, engulfing a large amount of prey. As I mentioned earlier, they expand these large accordion pleats. You can see one animal here, and then the second animal behind it. Their accordion pleats, their lower mandible and lower throat grooves are just super expanded out, engulfing as much prey and water as possible. Their upper mandible is here, and then the other one is here, so their blowholes would be down in this area, if that helps to orient you guys a little bit. This is a picture by Bernardo, and I love this picture. This is this one little escapee. You have to wonder if it actually fell in or if he was the lucky one that got out, but you can see beautifully here how the baleen hangs from the upper jaw, and then here's our lower jaw and those expanding throat grooves. And this was this was taken in Monterey, and here you can see scars of all of the barnacles. Again, the lower throat grooves on the bottom, all with that lower jaw is open right now, kind of created like a hot pool there. I think it was kind of a funny way he surfaced, and you can see the upper jaw is open with the baleen hanging down, and then the blowhole right in this area, and the eye would be right about here. And birds will take advantage of that. Of course, they're bringing a lot of prey up to the surface. In this case, there was actually a sea lion that was kind of caught up in it, and it jumped out just as the whale started to close its mouth. And there's a second whale here in this area. So they're here for this very rich abundance of prey, as I mentioned earlier, primarily eating bait fish, anchovies and sardines, sometimes fish of a little bit larger size, but humpbacks are super adaptable. So they'll also eat krill. They'll eat kind of whatever's available, whatever's most abundant in the area. So they're looking for energy, nutrition, not necessarily moving around or for specific nutrition. And as I mentioned, super active, as you can see here. They love to play in kelp as well. We're super creative, so we call it kelping. And oftentimes, if you're watching a humpback whale and see a little patty of kelp nearby, keep an eye on it, because they almost always will roll over or come up underneath it. But that also really is an indication as to why humpback whales are one of the most often entangled species. It's very natural for them to want to engage and play with kelp, and you can't, you know, I mean, if you think about what a fishing net would look like underwater, I'm sure to a whale, it probably, especially one that's drifting at drift and not engaged in active fishing, probably looks a lot like kelp, the way it's drifting through the water. And so this is one reason we have seen as how humpback whales constantly get entangled. They're definitely one of the species that gets entangled most off of our coastline, and often, unfortunately, with drift fisheries. Blue whales, blue whales, they are amazing. And hopefully some of you guys have seen blue whales from the Palos Verdes Peninsula. Even this summer, we've had a few, not as many as I'd like, but we've had a few. There's been a cow-calf buzzing around here as well. We can see, I mean, they are in the Northern Hemisphere up to about 85 feet long. They can get to 105 feet long as the longest on record. That's typically down in the Southern Hemisphere where the prey is a bit more abundant. On the West Coast, there's believed to be about 1,500 to 2,000 animals, and only about 15,000 in the world. At one time, we had over 300,000 blue whales, but they were hunted, and they were hunted quite successfully. And this is what we're left with, is about 15,000 blue whales. Oops, let me... They have a very, very tall column-like blow, as I mentioned earlier, about 25 to 30 feet high. And they were hunted not only for their baleen, which was kind of used like plastic. And again, this is stuff that you guys teach about and know at PVIC, but also for their blubber, their oil, their meat. And as I mentioned, a really, really high amount of whaling impacted the blue whales. They had gotten so good at hunting blue whales that they were killing about 30,000 a year in the mid-30s. And you know, it's just really efficient. If they have to go all the way to the Arctic to kill whales, then we're going to kill as many as possible during that time. So we nearly wiped out their population in the 30s, and we're seeing a slow recovery now as Marine Mammal Protection Act and other protections are in place. They have a big, powerful tail. All their motion comes from this tail stalk we call the peduncle, and those wide flukes. They're pretty amazing to see. They just really take your breath away. I want to scooch through here really quickly and talk about fin whales for a moment, as I see that I have just jabber-jawed on and we're getting late in the afternoon. So here you can see a blue whale that is foraging. So this side is that upper jaw. The baleen is hanging straight down from the upper jaw in the picture, kind of hanging off to the left. And this whole area is its lower jaw expanded, those throat grooves. And I believe I have a picture here that's going to show you what that looks like underwater. I will say this one, ship strike is a major problem for blue whales. Unfortunately, as the ships transit close to our coastline, they're often going through areas of high abundance of prey, and blue whales are you know, deep in foraging and not really watching, so to speak. If you think about evolutionary, in terms of evolution, ships are still just a very recent threat to whales, so they don't really know to avoid them. Their primary prey and almost sole prey is krill. They will also eat pelagic red crabs, which is very closely related to krill. They do not eat fish at all. They don't have a digestion for it. It does not sit well with them. And so, as I mentioned, with gray whale or with humpback whales that will adapt to prey, blue whales are very, very specific target eaters, looking only for krill. When krill is good, that's great for blue whales. As you can imagine, though, when we don't have the wind and the upwelling, makes it a little bit harder for blue whales to find their prey. Then they will be feeding deeper and further offshore, and we're less likely to see them. So years like this, when we've had spring winds and you know, lots of cooler weather, we're lucky and tend to see blue whales a little bit more. Here's an image that Monterey Bay has posted where you can see their throat grooves fully expanded underwater. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. And here's another photo I took of, we're looking straight down into the lower jaw of the blue whale. And you can see there's no tongue there. That, as I mentioned before, that tongue has fallen back and just left that whole lower jaw as a big cavernous area for them to fill up and engulf their prey and get as much bang for the buck, if you will. They have very large blowholes. Some say that a large, full-grown, adult, 105-foot massive blue whale, a toddler, could crawl through their blowholes. I don't know, I haven't seen it, but I have had very, very close encounter with a blue whale. Here we were in the Gulf of St. Lawrence doing a blue whale research project, and this blue whale was coming in towards our very small 17-foot inflatable Zodiac, and it was coming kind of 90 degrees to us right at our starboard beam. And here was it was about a whale length away, about 100 feet away. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And then the next thing I know, it surfaced again right next to the boat, right next to the boat. And so then as it dipped under our boat, we could actually see the whale on all sides of us. I could see the head just underwater on one side, the flukes just underwater on the other side, and I could actually see the pectoral fins kind of popping out, you know, I mean, underwater of us, of course, but it was so shallow and so close below the boat that I could see the entire expanse of the animal under us. And just at that moment, I was like, hope it doesn't flick its tail, please, please, please. But of course it didn't. It would have no reason to flick its tail at us. So fortunately it moved on, but that was an amazing, breathtaking moment that I'll never forget. Here again at Condor Express in Santa Barbara, we've had so many great experiences, and Blue whales can be very curious as well. If a boater, cuts its engines and stays still, oftentimes a blue whale might come in and check you out. Tend to be a little bit more elusive than many species of whales, though. And blue whales have, of course, they're the largest animal in the world, so they have all the fun facts. They have a heart the size of a small car. They have their flukes are the width of soccer goalposts. Their tongue is the size of a African elephant, which is the largest terrestrial mammal. I mean, just on and on and on are just like mind-blowing wows with blue whales. And I just want to touch really quickly on fin whales because they are also, I think they're underrated because blue whales are a little bit bigger than they are, but they are the second largest whale in the world. And we're equally hunted. Actually, the records that are being unburied now are showing that they were probably more heavily impacted than blue whales were. There were higher numbers of fin whales taken by hunting, by whaling in the 30s and 40s. Here you can see many historic whaling photos. This is a crazy picture. I wouldn't expect you to be able to see any one detail on it, but what it's getting at is whaling records that have been uncovered by Russian and Japanese whalers, whaling records, records that weren't turned in or reported. And now we know that the numbers are extremely higher than originally thought for all the whaling, all the animals that were taken. And here you can see that twice as many fin whales were taken as blue whales in the 30s and 40s. Imagine incredible numbers. Over 700,000 fin whales have been hunted by whalers, and there's only some 40,000 left in our world's ocean. So you can imagine the ecological impacts when you had that much large biomass. And we're talking about now learning about how rich the fecal matter is in a whale and how it stirs up the ocean when they release the iron and nutrients from their waste into the ocean, and how it creates a little bit of a nutrient migration for them to pull up nutrients to the surface from down below. It's really had a huge impact on us. I'm sorry, I said 40,000, 84,000 fin whales in the world. So we do get them here that they're more recently seen, as the census record showed that I shared with you. We're starting to see them a bit more often. Typically in the spring is when we see fin whales. They have a taller dorsal fin. They have a similar tall column-like blow, but it's that really, really striking tall dorsal fin that makes them easy to tell from a blue whale. And they have a very diagnostic white right lower jaw if you get to see them. I have an aerial photo from our friend down in Newport. Kristen took this picture, and you can see a white right lower jaw. They are also amazing whales, but because we're getting close to an hour, I want to stop and see if there's any questions. And I have a whole nother hour for you guys, but we'll take a break. I'm just kidding. I know we don't have that long, but I think this is a really good stopping point, covering 3 of the primary whales that we could see during the summer. Are there questions? Or people, should I wake them up? Maybe I should ring a bell.
Somebody asked a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Earlier, what was the #1 cause of death? #1 cause that attributes to the stranded whale deaths?
Yeah, that varies by species. For gray whales, recently it's definitely nutrition. They're definitely starving and skinny, malnutritioned animals. Blue whales and fin whales, it tends to be ship strike. 2 of the biggest threats to whales in the world are ship strike and entanglements. Over 300,000 cetaceans get entangled every year worldwide. It's pretty tragic. And we don't know the number of ship strikes because a lot of those we suspect happen offshore, and we don't ever see, residual effects of that. Why are blue and fin whales less barnacles? I see that question, Adela. They're faster moving whales, so they because they're moving through the water a little bit faster. It's harder for a barnacle to actually settle out on that whale, and plus they're moving through the water so fast that typically it would just kind of whisk it away. They also don't go into the same habitats. Gray whales are actually let me find my words here, sorry. gray whales breeding grounds are also where the gray whales barnacles are reproducing. So in those lagoons, we actually have, there you have the larval barnacles looking to settle out on the gray whales. So, but primarily it's because blues and fins are faster whales. Are you planning any whale watching trips this year? Oh, yes. Well, so for most certainly, our two primary companies, Redondo Beach Whale Watch, and if you're talking about just day trips, Redondo Beach Whale Watch and Marina del Rey Whale Watching are actively whale watching now. Of course, everybody's got reduced numbers and a little bit higher rates, but I highly encourage supporting our local businesses, as with everything. And I can get you that info. I can email you, or you can find whale watching information at cabrillowhalewatch.org or the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium's website. How often do you see sperm whales? That's a good question, Michael. You know, far and few between, but there does seem to be we know of a sperm whale that has been seen often, nicknamed Mango, that's been seen, not seen often, but seen often enough off of Point Vicente. It apparently spends a good part of its year foraging between Anacapa, Point Vicente, and the west end of Catalina. And a sperm whale was actually just seen off of the west end of Catalina last week. We don't know, in fact, if it was also Mango, but every now and then we do get them here. And boy, 4 years ago, I think it was 2016, about 30 sperm whales were spotted off of Dana Point area. That was quite a spectacle that I missed, unfortunately. And which whale is the fastest swimmer between fin and sei whales? They're probably similar, to be honest. Clocking in at about 25 miles an hour. Pretty good. You know, they're very, very closely related. Fins, seis, and Brutus whales. I have a slide actually to show you guys that, but they're very, very closely related, looking very similar. We'll get experts going into big debates trying to, whoops, did I lose the screen altogether? Trying to debate similarities. Are you seeing my screen moving now? Okay, I wasn't sure which screen moved into. Here you can see how similar those animals are. This is a minke whale and a Brutus whale, which is closely related to the sei whale as well, and a fin whale. Besides size, they're very, very similar looking, both all very streamlined, muscular, strong whales. Yeah, these are great questions.
It looks like humpback babies have barnacles on them already. What is that?
In the picture that I had here, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and even in other images that I've seen.
Yeah, so I'll use this picture in case that hits on it. What we're seeing here are not barnacles, but they're tubercles. Those bumps that I mentioned, those are hair follicles that are enlarged hair follicles that they have. We believe that they're used for sensory, but also for possibly for hydrodynamics. Cool. On these whales. So typically you'll see them. Now gray whales will get barnacles as calves. As I mentioned, they settle out on their host in the lagoons, but what we'll see is that they'll be quite small. So, you know, we'll see them, we call them seed barnacles, right? As they start to implant and then get larger. Oh, that's an adult, a mother adult there. So they do settle out, and they can settle quite young, but they won't be large until they've had some time to grow, a few months at least, before they start to get big enough. I'm going to just throw this other slide up because it's really fun. And then if we have time, or if anybody's curious, but you can look at that and see if we have any other questions. This is looking at the engulfment capacity of these large whales when they expand their lower pleats. Our friends up at Hopkins Marine Lab have done a lot of studies on the ability to expand those lower jaws. They looked at the tissue involved in tissue involved here in that lower jaw, the skin and the expandability and strength of it, kind of that tensile strength really. The lower jaws can be rotated out and they actually move and separate a little bit. So the lower jaws are not attached here, giving them extra room to expand. And then they just did numerous studies looking at how large they open. And I just am so impressed by an animal that's 24 meters, right? 75 feet or so. It can engulf 133% of its body, right? That's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive stuff. Whales are amazing. I promised you I could go on and have lots to talk about. Hopefully I've given you guys some fun new information or giving you something to look out for, but I'm around. If you have any, I see I have a few more questions popped up here. Fastest swimmer, what about whale lice? Are any whales not susceptible to whale lice? Paul, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, some of these larger whales, we don't see whale lice on fins and blues very often at all. I would say, I don't know that that's always the case, but I'm sure it has to do with contact and accessibility, right? Gray whales, we know they pass their lice on to their young through the birthing canal. So gray whale calves have whale lice from, the get-go, and they pick them up by rolling in contact with their mom. That's a good question, though. I don't know about all species. Has plastic pollution, Anne's question, been studied as it impacts baleen whales? Yeah, unfortunately, we know that, there's a gray whale study that is really, really just not a gray whale study, this gray whale stranding, it stranded in Washington. Boy, this was probably 15 years ago. And I know you can get a picture of it if you Google it. When they did a necropsy, they cut open the stomach, and gray whales are bottom feeders, and you can't be very specific when you don't have hands and the ability to pluck food out. You're just engulfing your prey. And in the case of gray whales, sucking up the mud from the ocean floor. And so here they are sucking up mud from the ocean floor, and the stuff that they found in that belly of that poor gray whale, sweatpants, golf balls, plastic bags like crazy, so there's the, in that case, it blocks their digestion and their ability to feed, and, fakes the full factor, makes them feel like they're full, or doesn't leave any room for them to have prey or digest it properly, which is a huge problem. But unfortunately, plastics, as we learn more and more about microplastics, I'm sure a large number of these whales are unintentionally getting plasticized in a sense. Some really interesting facts came out of a microplastics workshop that I was at, and they talked about two that just blow me away. One was that species like krill are starting to eat and process plastic. So they will actually, they'll eat it unintentionally, and then they digest it and process it. So part of their body is, they're kind of storing it in their body once they eat it, but they're also, through their waste, as they poop it, now they're pooping out even micro or like smaller pieces of plastic. Microplastics are so small that they're now smaller than water molecules. So it's almost impossible to test or impossible to stop, because you can't strain plastics out of water that are smaller than water. Then you're just building a wall. So you're not able, so it's really a bad problem. The other one that I thought was just crazy disgusting is that some corals are finding are preferentially eating plastics. And I had a hard time wrapping my head around, like, why would they do that? But then the analogy was, well, some people might prefer a cake instead of a bowl of spinach, right? And we know spinach is better for us, but boy, isn't it more fun to eat that cake. I don't know if it's that I doubt they're that aware of it, but that gives you kind of an idea of how an animal can take in something that's unhealthy. So plastics are a huge problem. And I will say that I think it's, you know, it's I don't think this is a shameless plug, because it's plastics is a pretty big deal all around. But, you know, we are coming up on September, which is typically California Coastal Cleanup Day. And given our current situation, you know, we're not going to encourage everybody to go out to one beach and clean up a beach. All entities are gathering up and encouraging Coastal Cleanup Month and cleaning where you live. The Cabrillo Aquarium's kind of slogan for this this coming month is clean streets equal clean oceans. And I'm sure you guys know that, but it's just a, you know, make a point of telling your friends even that go out and pick up a couple pieces of trash outside. Bernardo is really good about it. He's better than anybody I know. He picks up trash everywhere he goes, everywhere. He always has a little trash bag with him and just picks stuff up. And, you know, it's a scary time for us to just be picking up trash or touching things, but all we need to do is wash our hands before we touch our face, right? I mean, it's not, we don't have, we don't know yet that coronavirus is absorbing through our skin. We just need to not touch our face with it. So, you know, I think plastics, I think anything we can do to promote reusable or repurposable things and stop using our, using plastics is, I mean, I'm even bad at it and I try to be as good as possible, but here I'm holding a cute little plastic USB, you know, thing that had a whale, so I had to have it. And you know, I mean, it would be good to do a plastic audit. I've committed myself to do a plastic audit and one day see how much, put out a challenge. So I challenge you guys to do a little plastic audit in your life and see how much plastic waste you make. I think it's going to shock me and I'm really scared. And yes, I'll be happy to come back anytime you guys want me, anytime. And I would love to have any of you on a future expedition. At this moment, we are going to be doing our trip to Baja with the Cabrillo Aquarium. You know, the boats are taking all precautions. Long range boats have, I work closely, I'm a captain as well, and I work closely with our long-range fishing fleets and overnight trips here out of San Pedro, and everybody's installing UV filters through their air circulation systems and doing everything they can to make it safe. And of course, you know, they do think that getting out in the air is a very good thing. So Anne and Denise and Norm and many of you guys have my contact information. Please feel free to share it. I'm happy to do anything I can for you guys and help in any way. Hi, Dan Crane's there too. I see him. He came to Baja with us. Lots of familiar faces. How nice. Well, I think we got, oh, do you sleep and live on boats in Baja? We do, yeah, so the trip we do through the Cabrillo Aquarium, we actually charter a boat out of San Diego, one of the largest in the long-range fishing fleet, 115-foot vessel called the Royal Polaris, and it's a liveaboard, and we sleep on it, 2 people per room, and eat and sleep well and eat well. Did I say that already? Because that's a big part of it. We hike on remote islands every day, and we spend 3 days anchored in the lagoon in Mexico, and just have a really, really good time. Yeah. I take bus trips down there as well, but I think it's going to be a while before I can plan a bus trip, unfortunately.
Mm.
I put a question up there. I don't know if you saw it. What led?
Oh, you went mute again.
That what legislation has not already been submitted that you feel is important to address regarding whales?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. That's a big question, Wanda.
Sorry.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. I should have that one just ready, armed and ready. I see both sides of so many things, so I don't think there's any one answer to, like, I'm really opposed to banning fishing of any sort. I think that, there's always good regulations that can help, but I don't think any industry should be banned. It should just be made better. I think, you know, same with MPAs. I think they're great. What's the most important legislation? I would like to see some, oh, darn it, now I'm feeling silly. Oh my goodness.
No pressure.
All right, maybe there's another question and I'm gonna keep processing that one really quickly.
Take your time.
Yeah, right? No, that's such a great question. It makes, yeah, wow. I see, thank you, Susan. I'm glad to see you. What legislation? Somebody quick, ask me another question really quick so I can get back to Wanda.
Where did you get your captain's license?
Diane.
Yeah, I got my captain's license in, when did I get it? 3 years ago. And there's a captain's school down in San Diego. I went down and studied, but I worked with a lot of our local boats, and I have some great mentors, some amazing people that have helped train me and continue to train me, because I feel like I'm definitely in my first stage license. Boy, you know, running some of those bigger boats is quite intimidating. And the first time I utilized my license during the summer sometimes to drive as a second or the night captain on fishing boats, long range fishing boats. And boy, the very first time you are driving at night and everybody's asleep and you realize you have all these lives in your hand, and you know, you're kind of out there in the middle of nowhere in the dark, relying on equipment. You're just praying it all works. But I had a really amazing mentors, and yeah, I really enjoy driving a boat and being on the water as much as I can.
Cool.
Diane?
Yes.
Hi, this is Bob McKenzie. How many fin whales did you say there were?
So 84,000 in the world right now. And surprisingly, the records I show said something up to 8,000 in our area, or in the California, Oregon, Washington stock. That is an increasing number. Whoops, I lost my slide here. There you go. They recently were, our whales here in the Eastern North Pacific were also recently separated into a subspecies, into a unique subspecies due to genetics. So basically it just says they haven't interacted or interbred with Atlantic fin whales in a very, very long time is really what that means.
Diane,
Yes.
this is Susan Alloward, and I would like to know, please, how can we acquire some of your slides, because they themselves are wonderful education tools.
Oh, thank you. You know, if you have a project you want to work on, and I'm happy to work with you guys to help. Most of these photos are mine. I did have some of them are Bernardo Alps as well. Some of the graphics, you know, we'd have to just contact. Some of them are like this. This is taken from a research paper. This, you know, the stuff about humpback whale populations, for example. Some of this information I gathered up from, I pulled this from research papers. So you just let me know which ones you might be interested in, and I'm happy to share if I can, or put you in contact with the right people. Yeah, I'm happy to share. I mean, my whole goal in life is to try to get educational materials, you know, into naturalist hands, and to help us all teach the greater public, and teach people about whales and get them excited.
Diane?
Yes, Anne.
Norm is recording this.
Yes.
So Susan, you can look at this Zoom presentation again, and then decide if there's anything in particular you want, all right?
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. Yeah. If you have anything particular that you want or you're interested in, or even if there's any, you know, if you think, oh my gosh, there was that one topic you talked about and I can't remember the details, you know, just hit me up through Anne or Denise and Norm. They all know how to get a hold of me, and I'm happy to share in any way I can. I don't tend to send my slides just in general, Susan, because like I said, some of this is, you know, research papers. It's all stuff I've pulled off, you know, off of the internet or out of their papers. It's all published. I only borrowed with credit, but I just feel it's more appropriate to do a personal share.
Have you heard anything on the vaquita?
Oh, it kills me. Isn't it sad? Yeah, the vaquita is definitely they did some, they have, let me regroup here. They have hydrophones placed throughout the range of the vaquita, and they did detect some, a few sounds in the fall. They did get some pictures of calves, which was really exciting. On the other hand, the other side of that, the last estimate based on the mortality rate, they thought there was probably less than 10, maybe even 5 or so. So there's still hope, and they really had high hopes for protecting the last few in captivity. You guys probably followed that. I'm not sure. We had a project called Vaquita CPR where they tried to go out and actually capture a couple. And as tragic and scary as that sounds, putting the last few into captivity until you can basically clean up their natural habitat and get all that stuff, squared away with poaching and all the stuff that's going on in their area, the entanglements and the totoaba poaching, get all that cleaned up and then release them back. It wasn't to try to, keep them in a captive life forever, but it worked for the condor, and they really, and for other species, and they really had hoped that would work well. But unfortunately, as soon as they tried to capture them, and we knew that with porpoises, it was kind of 50-50. There's porpoises don't tend to do well in captivity, where some species, do okay. And of course, we lost one while we were in that project, so it was pretty heartbreaking. They still have hope, I tell you. We've got some amazing people, both in Mexico here and here in the US, that have just dedicated so much time and energy to the vaquita, and they still have a lot of hope. And I think if they can have hope, I think all of us can. It's just all about making sure. I think that just emphasizes even more about watching our food and what we eat and what we where we buy our shrimp. And I think getting this totoaba issue under wraps is a big deal. We need to really figure out how to stop that poaching from happening. And now that the cartel have kind of jumped on board, and how a totoaba is going for like as much as Coke in Mexico right now. I mean, it's just ridiculous, the value that they're able to put on it. So there's not a lot to, and it's very hard. What they're actually doing is smuggling them across the border and flying them out from the US. So, maybe things like the pandemic will have a few positive things. If that got in the way of smuggling them across the border or getting them onto planes and flying them to China or Asia, maybe that, is one upside, and we can find the light, find the brightness.
Okay, if anybody else has any questions?
I have one more, please.
Yes.
Go ahead, Susan.
You had a graphic that showed the, I think it was the humpback, where they went up to feed, and in the Eastern Pacific, there seemed to be a lot less than in the Western Pacific.
Oh.
That's the one right there. Is there a reason for that?
I would, so these are the breeding grounds.
Right.
And then these are the feeding grounds. And I would say that probably is attributed to a lot of whale hunting,
Okay.
not current, but probably historic whale hunting.
Uh-huh.
They would definitely have been taking from these waters prior,
Right.
before taking out to further at sea.
Thank you. It really is a most striking graphic.
It is. Yeah, you're right.
Adele asked if the totoaba would be a legislative issue.
The problem is that it's not a buying food that harms them. So there's already an issue. I try to find the right words here, picking carefully to say if it's a legislative issue, but there have already been mandates that look at import and what foods, what seafoods and fisheries we can import. And I think this goes back to emphasizing buying local and eating local as much as you can. And a lot of people wouldn't hesitate to buy organic fruits and vegetables, but they don't think that going to your local, down to your dock and buying from your local fishermen is as important. And it really is. Supporting your local fisheries is more critical, because you're not then, not only do you have the impact of shipping or flying seafood, over to us, but also a lot of countries don't have all the legislation protecting them. So, we have a ban on gill nets 3 miles from shore. We have a lot of really strict regulations on fisheries here in California and in the US, which a lot of countries don't have. And because of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, they are looking at I think countries have 2 or 3 years to adapt, but they are looking at being really strict on what they import. And that could play into the issue of the fisheries. So Totoaba, the legislative issue with Totoaba would be really hard because it's all illegal. The Totoaba are protected fish in Mexico. They're poaching them every single time they catch them anyway. They're not a legal fishery, and they don't sell the Totoaba to us. They're shipped to Asia for
like a delicacy kind of a thing.
Yes, exactly. So they're not eaten here. There's really very little US has to do with it. The one thing that we can do is avoid the big large shrimp, the big large delicious shrimp from Mexico, because oftentimes that is shrimp from trawlers in the Gulf of California. But now we know that shrimp trawling isn't happening, as that whole area of the Totoaba Range they don't allow shrimp trawlers there anymore. So that is less of an issue than it was at one time. Now it's really primarily the poaching and the Totoaba fishery.
Diane, this is Susan again.
Yeah.
Sorry, but how do you spell Totoaba, and what is it?
Totoaba, Totoaba, Totoaba. Yeah, Totoaba. It's a large fish, and it's used. It's actually. I was going to look it up really quick and share with you guys. It's quite a large fish as well, and it's fished for its bladder. We can actually show a pretty picture of it here.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Huh. Oh, it is big. My word, it's as big as a man. It's bigger than a man.
It's a very large fish. It's like the size of a vaquita. So that's one reason why their nets do so very well, catching it. Look at this, the size of a football player, they even say. Now, it's a very, very large fish. There was a very close, another species very close to the Totoaba that was originally fished off of Asian countries, off of China, and then those were fished out, and then they found the Totoaba in the Gulf was so close, and started fishing that. So this has been a very, very long time, and they were protected because they were fished. Then they were protected as an endangered species. And then shrimp trawling became the biggest threat to vaquita. But then once the shrimp trawlers were taken out of the water, the fishermen needed something to do for work, and the drug cartel kind of moved in and started paying them to fish for the Totoaba, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. I'm a little less ignorant now.
It's a pretty big deal. There's a really great book called Vaquita. I don't remember the subtitle, by Brooke Besseson. And, you know, it's a complex issue because it's small communities struggling for work. Well before pandemic problems, they were struggling for work and what they could do. Access is an issue. They lived off the sea. They fished the sea. This is their jobs. And to tell fishermen, you know, it turned out a lot of them really didn't even realize there was a small porpoise there. Because they're so far and few between, and they're not really seen very well. You know, we think of our dolphins and you think of big pods and you can see them splashing as they swim through the water, but vaquita are typically very solo and quick at the surface. They don't spend a lot of time at the surface, in and one and down. And so a lot of fishermen were like, oh, they don't even exist. What are you talking about? Until they would see them dead in their nets. So there's a lot of cultural and economic issues well beyond the environmental stuff, as well as, and it's been a very complex issue. And for Americans to, you know, try to go down there and say, you know, you need to change what you're doing is also, again, like I said, a very cultural issue. We can't really go down and tell Mexico how to manage their environmental issues.
I think it's very important how you give so many different sides of any question to help us realize and try not to be an ugly American. How do you spell that Makita?
Oh, vaquita, V-A-Q-U-I-T-A.
Thank you. I was way off on that. I would never have found it. Thank you.
Vaquita, yes, yeah, of course.
Susan, I'll try to get the book for our library.
Yeah, it's a very good book. I've tried to, you know, I try to take a well-rounded perspective, but that's what makes it hard when people like Wanda say, what's the legislation we should have? It's like, well, let me sit down and look at, because you gotta weigh all the sides. And I try really hard not to have an emotional reaction. One animal dying doesn't mean it's a problem that needs to be dealt with. It means let's look at it and see if it's a big problem that's affecting a whole population or a whole species, and not just you know, one issue. So I constantly move for education before legislation. That's really my goal. I try to find ways that we can reach people and reaching the public. I've worked really hard to what I like to call de-villainize fisheries and fishing. I don't think it's, I think it can be managed. And I think if we can open the conversation instead of attacking, you know, so often fishermen feel attacked and then they attack back. And I think that if we can open the conversation and continue to have respectful, open conversations, I think some of the most fun and some of the best experiences I've had have been, and some of the most knowledgeable marine people are fishermen that are out there every day and seeing the ocean, you know, and seeing what's out there.
Fabulous. I hope that we get you back soon.
I'm happy to. What are you guys doing next Tuesday? I'm just kidding. Well, thank you guys. I do have a day job and I'm going to probably have to get back to it soon, but I'm really happy to spend the lunchtime with you. And I hope to see you all again. And it's so nice to see all of my friends that I've traveled to Baja with or done the Whale Watch program with. And I hope everybody's staying safe and clean and getting outside.
Diane, I'll try to get in touch with more of the docents, see what they want to hear more about and get back to you.
You have my list of the easiest stuff I can talk about,
Okay.
And any one of the topics that we touched on today, we could expand on as well. So,
Thank
you know,
you.
yeah, if there's anything you want to hear more about, I'm happy to share.
Thank you. Well, just have fine free time for you.
You know what? I'm going to do a shameless, there was one shameless plug, and maybe Anne can pass the word around. You know, there's been a lot of problems with our tide pools in the last couple of months. I'm sure it's affecting you guys as much as it is the tide pools in San Pedro. Got a lot of people from other communities coming in and making their capacity on their fishing allotments, as well as taking some illegally. And so the aquarium has been working with USCC grant to put together a series on, I call it Tide Pool Talks, but kind of community roundtables. We have another panel discussion coming up tomorrow night. It'll be via Zoom at 6:30. You can find out more and register for free on our the aquarium website, cabrillo-marine-aquarium.org. We'll be looking this week at management and policy and how management is enforced, which is the biggest problem with any problem. No matter, that's again, going back to the legislation question, is anything that you legislate, you have to enforce, otherwise it doesn't matter, right? So, so they're gonna talk about legislation and enforcement and how they're managing it. So yeah, 6:30 till 8 tomorrow, if anybody's interested. And some really great talks and really great information about tide pools and the Rocky Shore habitat.
Well, and thank you, but I think it's really important to let the young children know, because often they're the ones who will hold their parents back from over harvesting. So
true, and so true. Unfortunately, right now what we're seeing is that they're giving the buckets to their kids too and filling up, and I don't know. It's been a really rough,
Horrendous.
Yeah, a lot of wildlife being taken from the tide pools, and some of it's been commercial, like for restaurants, and some people are saying, you know, they can't get food because of COVID and they can't work, so now they're collecting food. And you know, again, a lot of layers. There's a lot. It's a complex issue, and as with everything, that's the downside. The more you know, the harder it becomes, I think. You know, you have to really look at all sides of things though before you make some rash decisions. So anyway, the more you know, so find out more tomorrow. Thanks again for the opportunity, you guys. It was a lot of fun.